Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome to Google Education on Air. I'm Erica Zimmer, and I'm here with Lucy Delabure for this session. And this session is using Google tools to personalize learning. Both Lucy and I are Vermont educators working intensely with Google tools to help educators personalize learning. You can access the slides to the presentation on the Education on Air website, the 2016 website, and I'll be facilitating the Q&A section for Lucy's session. So feel free to add any questions you may have in that Q&A section, and we will take breaks to answer a few throughout this session. And then also Lucy and I will stay on after the presentation for a few minutes to answer any additional questions you may have. And we will also respond to additional questions throughout the weekend on the event page. So let's get started. Lucy Delabure is a Vermont Google Education Group leader. And in 2008, she became a Google Certified Teacher, which is now Google Certified Innovator. And she is also a Google Certified Trainer. Not only has Lucy been an evangelist of Google tools for over 10 years, she has been an evangelist of personalized learning for more than 10 years. So it's no surprise that she finds Google tools so helpful and when personalizing learning. So I'm going to hand this over to Lucy now, and take it away, Lucy.
Thanks, Erica, and welcome everybody to Education on Air. I'm really excited to be here. I actually am in my 1983 vintage bus, so I'm not in a classroom right now, but this is where I do a lot of my work from right now. And so it's not quite a classroom setting, but it's my classroom. Let's put the slides on. And I think we're ready to start. So first of all, when I started thinking about this, the first thing I thought about was 1996. That's the year everything changed for me as an educator. That was the year that personalized learning really took off in my classroom. I still remember that year. We were going to get a new network. The computers were going to change into a new network. I never used a network before, so I took a class in NT networking so I could learn how to maintain this new network coming into the fall. We didn't have IT support back then. And so as I was taking this class, my students were doing something very different. In 1996, something else was happening in our neck of the woods in northern Vermont. That was the year that access to the internet stopped being a long-distance phone call through CompuServe and became a local phone call to the world via a local ISP called TogetherNet. That summer in 1996, everything changed. That summer, my students had gained access to unlimited information via the World Wide Web, and they spent the whole summer reading nonstop, reading complex informational text that wasn't even assigned to them. What was it that they were reading? Well, let me put it this way. When they came back to school in the fall, they went throughout the classroom, putting penguin screensavers onto every computer in my classroom. That summer, they had discovered Linux. Hold on a second. So that summer, they had discovered Linux. And I could have moved them over to our curriculum, but instead, what I decided to do was to move over to what they wanted to learn, and we learned Linux. And they set up the first school web server. They used Linux and something called Apache that I had never heard of, but soon was going to learn about through my students and by following their passion. Well, that year, not only did they build the first school web server, they designed web pages for our school and our community, and through their interest and their passion, our community got its first website. Meanwhile, these students were building literacy skills. They were writing for a whole worldwide audience. And within weeks of the website going live, they received the most incredible validation that their audience was indeed worldwide. we got an email from a man named Claude who lived in Washington State. He was on a quest to return a ring that he had found while doing some scuba diving in the Pacific Ocean. The ring had the letters NCUHS engraved on it. So Claude decided to type those letters in a search engine called Alta Vista, and that led him right to our school website that we had just launched. The email asked, could this possibly belong to someone in your community? It only took a matter of days before that ring was indeed returned to its rightful owner from our community. And our kids knew that they were indeed writing not for their teacher, but for an authentic audience. And in the next few years, they created new websites every year on a topic of their choice. And we submitted it to the International Cyber Fair competition sponsored by Global Schoolhouse. But something else was happening on the opposite coast that year. Another group of young college students from Stanford were working on their passion project, one that was going to get fueled by the type of personalized learning we had just experienced in our own classroom. That's the year that Larry Page and Sergey Brin began their own personal learning project. That's the year they began as students in Stanford and invented Google. The rest is history for Larry, for Sergey, and for any student who has access to tools and the passion to pursue their own personal learning journey. Drop my pen. As you can imagine, the conversation about personalized learning has increased recently. In the past few years, you'll hear more and more about personalized learning. But in Vermont, it's been part of our conversation for many years, from the early pilots in 2004 to a more recent legislative act called Act 77 in 2013, where every personal learning plan, every student starting in grade 7 gets a personal learning plan. Some schools are even choosing to implement that younger. You can learn a lot more about Vermont's commitment to personalized learning looking at the Agency of Education website or the PLP Pathway website, which was set up by a Vermont group of educators from the Tarrant Institute in the University of Vermont. But I'll just summarize briefly. What we call personalized learning in Vermont is a system of approaches that deepens student learning by incorporating a student's strength, their needs, their interests, student voice, and choice in not only what they learn, but how, when, and where they learn it. Along with the Agency of Education website, a lot of Vermonters are looking towards the PLP Pathways website that was developed by the Tarrant Institute and University of Vermont. So you can find more information there. But throughout this session, I'm going to be pulling out a graphic that I got from Vermont educator Don Taylor from Main Street Middle School and Dr. James Nagel from St. Michael's College, who contribute regularly to the PLP Pathways website. Now, I've been fortunate enough to watch students personalize their learning from the early days. Starting in 2004, when our Gmail accounts and started accessing Google Docs in its earliest days, and where early educators in Vermont were using Google Docs to try to collaborate with their students, eventually convincing the rest of the staff to come along, and we became one of the first Google Apps schools in Vermont. Over the years, that school has grown to the point where every student, grades K through 8, has an EPortfolio that tells the story of personalized learning for their students. A half hour is not a long enough time to tell this story, so I've decided to just highlight one or two examples as time permits, following each of the following tools. I realize there's no way I can include all the ways that Google tools can be used in personalized learning. The slide deck was way too long, so I started cutting back, got rid of a lot of the how-to details, and decided to just link to some of the blog posts that have those how-to details. But I did make myself a promise that I would add more blog posts to feature some of the how-tos that I had to cut out of this short half-hour journey. So you'll be able to find the blog post on my Learning with Lucy website, which I'll add to this presentation at the end. Let's get started with one of my favorite tools, Google Slides. I love Google Slides, and you'll see why in a few minutes. For several years, one of the things that I do is I start almost every class learning more about my students' personal interests using an activity that I call passion presentations. It's not unusual for a new class to start with introductions. By the time the last person introduces themselves, many of us could not name everybody in here, and we probably have forgotten half of what our participants and our classmates are saying because we're focused on what we're going to say in the introduction. So I usually start with a 20-minute activity that's very hands-on with using Google Slides. I start with this passion presentation. I create 26 slides labeled A to Z, and I set the visibility where anyone with the link can edit, at least for a little bit, and then we change it later. With that visibility setting, everyone can just get right on. I don't have to worry about people's Google accounts and finding out their emails. I get everybody going into this hands-on activity. I also add the following instructions to the top of the slides with a few tips and a few examples of what they're supposed to be doing. And of course, I give the instructions verbally, but then those people who just want to jump in can just look at those instructions and move forward. It's not uncommon to have students who love traveling and cooking and gardening or the Red Sox or the Mets or music to start sharing. These students immediately start sharing hikes and recipes that they've enjoyed while they're doing this. It's not a totally silent activity. And every once in a while, I learn something very unexpected about one of my students, like the young woman who had 3 axe throwing gold medals. Nobody messed with her all semester. I encourage them to add a YouTube video related to their passion, and perhaps a picture or two using Google search. And if possible, to link a website that tells us more about their passion. And a shout out to Google for reinstating what used to be the research tool as the Explore tool. I modeled this myself by putting in a slide of one of my own passions, a slide that lets my students know that I love live music and that my sons are musicians. And I add a few examples from previous students. This one activity has set such a fun and positive tone in our classrooms that the students that I've had as grad students usually use it in their own work with students. Immediately, students are learning and doing with their hands. They're browsing the YouTube videos. They're sharing recipes and hikes. They're learning about each other. We're learning about them. But something else is happening. They're gaining fluency in using Google tools like Slides, which is a good thing because I use Slides for a lot of other reasons in my curriculum and in my courses. During that time, they're laughing and joking, and some fun things happen. Sometimes mistakes happen, like somebody changing the background for everybody else, and we all help them change it back. And the kids who put in animations are immediately recognized for being tech savvy or good with design. It gets us interacting right away in a much more active way than traditional introductions. We end by putting the slides on the projector and going through the traditional route of introductions. Another thing that I do with Google Slides is I do something called the Who Am I slide deck. The Who Am I slide deck is not a group project. It's an individual place for the students to start to focus on their own identity as a learner. The Who Am I slide deck can get filled with skills and strengths and interests, what's important to them and their core values. It's not something we do as a one-time activity. Instead, it's a dynamic artifact that the students keep adding to throughout their whole journey of personalized learning. There are a lot of ways that you can approach this Who Am I slide deck to help students create their identity. Also, slides could be used as an e-portfolio. It only takes a minute to create a slide deck and pick a theme and have it look really great for your e-portfolio. Students can quickly add slides to remind them of the type of evidence they're going to be collecting during the year in their e-portfolio. And each artifact can be put on a separate slide. A thumbnail or a link can be added, and an artifact description. Although Google usually only allows YouTube videos for media, there are ways to link to other media if you're creative. I've got a couple blog posts that I'm working on that will walk you through the steps of adding other artifacts to media artifacts to a Google presentation as an ePortfolio. You can also use the notes section as a place for students to reflect about their artifacts. And you can add a table of contents at the beginning of the slide deck. If your slide deck gets really long with lots of artifacts, you might put something like the characteristics of learning as icons and link to different sections of your slide deck using link to other slides. I'm not going to spend a lot more time on slides. I'm going to move over to Google Docs, but instead I'd like to ask Erica if there are any questions we should address.
Hi, Lucy. We have one question. Students learn on a different pace. How do you address and meet the core standards in relation to this?
Oh, that's a big question. I'll just give you a really quick piece right now with personalized learning, and that is just a practice is to have the instructions posted ahead of time. The people who are really ready to get going on this particular activity were able to dive in because the instructions were already posted. They didn't have to listen to me talk about it and wait for me to do each step. Now, that's just how I would do it for this activity. But if you use Google Classroom or Google Sites to post some of the activities that you might want students to use to learn ahead of time, and maybe have some YouTube videos, they can move forward at a pace that's comfortable to them. So let's move forward. We're going to now spend some time on Google Docs. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on Google Docs. I'm just going to show you a few features of Google Docs that can be used for personalized learning plans. Probably the most obvious is to put together a personalized learning plan on a Google Doc. It can have some core materials, and if you organize the template in a way that has carefully crafted questions and tables organized in a certain sequence, the students can see, and anybody else on their team can see, a summary of where they are in their personal learning journey. I would suggest, that you leave the visibility set so that key members of the team can comment. Perhaps teach your students and other members of the team to add a plus name if they want somebody specific to get notified of a new comment. The other thing that I would suggest is that you use your imagination and creativity to design templates that really invite the learner into the process. The language, the tables, the images, the colors in this personal learning plan is perfect for younger learners. But honestly, I think older learners could be engaged when documents are fun and creative. So make your documents fun. Invite the learner. Another benefit for using Google Docs is that it gives learners access to voice typing features. Not only is this a great feature for younger learners, but it's also a great tool for learners who find it easier to reflect out loud than in writing. In this example here, you see a first grader who was able to insert a picture into their document, and they use voice typing to add their reflection. Also, don't forget to teach your students how to use the bookmark feature in the table of contents found in the insert menu. If you add a bookmark to a certain location of a document, you can later link right to that section and reference it in an ePortfolio or another part of Google Site or Google presentation. In the table of contents feature, can also be organized in a way so that you can easily get to all the different characteristics of learning or habits of learning or whatever your school uses to organize its ePortfolios. That's a few things about Google Slides, Google Docs. Do we have other questions that we need to address about those two, Erica?
Yes, I have another question. I love doing things digitally, but the challenge is how to encourage kids who are challenged with writing.
So in that place, one of the things that I would suggest is you try to use audio comments or the Google Voice and Google Docs like we just suggested. Another one of my favorite tools is VoiceThread. And just a sneak preview about something that's happening with VoiceThread is they are integrating with Google Drive this year. I think in 2017, we're going to see Google Drive artifacts be able to be drawn in, and then students could add voice. That's just a couple ways that I would address that. So we're going to go on to next with spreadsheets. Now, teachers have been using spreadsheets for a long time to keep track of data. But what I suggest is that you get students using the spreadsheets. There's no reason why students can't learn to track their own data and provide evidence of their own goals. Here's just one example of a template that's set up for students to use to track their fitness over time. You could use a similar track progression of fluency levels, spelling proficiency, reading, maybe even the number of books you've read. There are a lot of things that you can do with spreadsheets that students can do themselves. And it also gives them real-world applications to build skills around collecting, communication, and interpreting their own personal data. Now, here's another example of a spreadsheet that I created after I read a blog post about something called Not Yet, You Bet way of goal setting. And as soon as I read this, I thought, oh, we could put this in a Google spreadsheet. So I made this template, which is available on the blog post listed on the next slide. But basically, the students put their goals in column A. In column B, they write a 1, 2, 3, 4 using the legend on the right about what progress they've made on those. And as soon as they hit a 4, it automatically moves the goal from the Not Yet column F to the You Bet column G. You can even use column D to put some links to those artifacts or reflections. Remember the bookmark feature we just talked about? You could put a link there to a reflection. And this can become a one-page summary. I put a link on the slides here to both Dale Ferriter's blog posts that inspired me to do this template and to my blog post on the Learning with Lucy blog that you can find instructions and the templates on how to use it. This, by the way, is also the same blog that I'll be using to add more examples from this website and this presentation. If you're a fan of Google Sheets, you're probably also a fan of Google Forms, Sheets' best friend. I never start a new course without doing a learner's needs assessment. A form cannot replace that intimacy of that face-to-face contact, but it can give you a starting point, and you can reference to some of the things you learned about your students through the learner's needs assessment to personalize their learning. Make sure that you ask questions that are both easy to fill in the blanks and open-ended. Questions about their interests, their learning styles, their goals. Leave some open-ended places for them to write also. Now, not only do I use forms at the beginning of a class, but I also try to use forms as an exit card at the end of the day, at the end of the week, and look at what students are asking and are reflecting about. But there's one problem with that. You end up with the data. But I've used a couple add-ons, such as roll call and save as docs, to return the data back to them. I don't have time to cover exactly all the details of how to do that, but I'll include those in one of my blog posts, or you can go directly to the roll call or save as docs website. They've got some great tutorials there too, to show you how you can return the ownership of those exit tickets back to the students. As your students start to accumulate more and more artifacts of learning, they're going to need a place to organize the artifacts in a meaningful way. So I'm going to share a couple tips about Google Drive, and we'll all end this with a look at Google Sites. First of all, Google Classroom has rapidly become a favorite tool of teachers, so I definitely suggest you do use it to help manage your student work. However, what I would suggest to do is have students organize a folder called My Showcase Portfolio and My Working Portfolio in their Google Drive first. And what I do with my working portfolio is I keep that private between myself and the students, and sometimes maybe other collaborators. And in the Showcase portfolio, I change that so it's visible to anyone with the link, or have the students change it so they can grab artifacts out of there to put in their final ePortfolio. And then in Google Classroom, I might add assignments such as that YouBet spreadsheet that I want students to fill out, or maybe their Google slide deck for the Who Am I spreadsheet. But one of the things that does happen with that is that if students turn those in, they end up being under your ownership. So remember to turn the ownership back to the students. Or better yet, have them use Shift-Z to add files from the Google presentation. Let me show you how that works. From the Google Classroom to their Showcase or Work portfolio. That way the file is in both locations. It says in Classroom. You don't want to move things out of Classroom. Leave the files in the Classroom structure, but don't tell them to move it. Tell them to add it to their own Workplace portfolio or to their Showcase portfolio using the Shift-Z method. And if you don't know how to use that, do a quick Google search. It will change your life. Finally, don't forget that you could use Google Photos, students' mobile devices, as part of the process for collecting artifacts. We're running a little short on time, so I'm going to, by the next couple of slides, basically set up a workflow that works for you. Practice this workflow yourself, maybe using your own portfolio. Post that workflow on a board so that students can see where they are in the process. And then the last part is Google Sites. Even young students, such as our kindergartners, are able to use Google Sites. We set up the templates for them, put a folder on. I've put a couple of templates here that you can use, and you can take a look at if you've got younger learners. And I've also added a video of two young ladies in middle school who are sharing their journey of their ePortfolio, introducing their ePortfolio. One of the things to always ask yourself is why. Why are we making this Google site called an ePortfolio? I think one of the main reasons is we want students to own their learning, be able to communicate their learning, and if they can do that, then we've succeeded in the journey of personalized learning. Phew, that was really fast, and I apologize right now for covering all these tools as possible ways for you to personalize learning. To Erica, so that she can see if there are some other questions that we should address.
Yes, going back to voice typing, there's a question about that. It says, older students seem to be really reluctant to use voice to text, particularly high school students. Any suggestions?
Let me go back here. So one of the suggestions is obviously don't force it. I have an accent because French is my first language, so I was probably one of those students who was reluctant. So I think just use it as an option. Maybe they can do this at home if it helps them. If it doesn't help them, don't use it.
Okay, we have a couple more. Let's see, I am teaching at an international school in Beijing and Google has blocked here. Students who do not have the VPN can't access Google tools. Is there an alternative way to do this?
Oh, you would have to pick a question that I can't quite answer right now. I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
But maybe we'll have some of the Google folks come in online and give us some suggestions if your Google tools are blocked. I'll try to address that question more online. I hope that you'll reach out with more questions. I know we're near the end of our time here. Not only reach out with questions, but share some links and some ways that you use Google tools to personalize learning. I'd love to share them with my teachers that I work with. And also reach out to me on Twitter. I'll put that information back on the screen, and on Google+. And I also want to thank Google for giving me this opportunity to be part of the 2016 Education on Air. I'll go back into the Q&A and try to answer some more questions. And I'd like to really thank Erica and my husband, Craig, who's doing the slides here on the side, for helping out with this session. Thanks, Erica.
You're welcome. Thanks, Lucy.
And I'll see you in the Q&A.
Yeah, sounds good.